Okay. I'm not a technology person. I always say that, but we'll get it going. Hopefully everything's going correctly. So I'll also just share briefly the purpose and mission statement of Resilient Roots. The mission statement is that Resilient Roots serves to provide a safe space for parents living with brain injuries to receive support, information, and encouragement as they grapple with the joys and challenges of parenting with this life-altering condition. And the purpose really is to provide support, encouragement, and information to parents who are living with brain injuries. And the group is open to anyone who is a parent that identifies as having a brain injury. And so that's not just the acquired traumatic brain injuries, it also includes strokes, if there was prior drug use, domestic violence. Everyone is welcome and absolutely no one will be judged. So, all that being said, I would like to go ahead and get into the introduction of our amazing guest speaker, who I am so grateful to have here today, Kelly Lang. Kelly Lang, co-author of The Miracle Child, Traumatic Brain Injury and Me, is a brain injury survivor and caregiver to her daughter who sustained a traumatic brain injury in 2001. She co-leads the Brain Injury Association of America's Advisory Council and serves on the Virginia Brain Injury Advisory Council. Her advocacy experience includes working with the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems Brain Injury Learning Collaborative and serving as a member of the Traumatic Brain Injury Leadership Group and the Person-Centered Advisory Group. Kelly has been the keynote speaker at several state and national brain injury conferences and conducted workshops and webinars, including the Administration for Community Living Stakeholder Day, universities, and many, many others. Kelly co-created and facilitated a series for brain injury survivors interested in getting more involved in their communities. Kelly is also a communications trainer with Innova Health Systems and has worked on projects with the Coalition for National Trauma Research. Kelly and her husband created a website, www.themiraclechild.org, educating others about brain injury. And we'll have that information all about where you can find Kelly and her websites at the end as well. So if you didn't get a chance to jot that down right now, don't worry about it. Kelly received her BA from American University and previously worked in the human resources field. And on a personal note, I'm really excited to have Kelly here today. It's an honor to serve with her on the advisory board for the Brain Injury Association of America. She has this awesome way of being like assertive but kind at the same time, making sure that what she's advocating for is heard, but not in a way that's just super aggressive. And I really admire that about Kelly. So I'm really excited to have her here today. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Shay. That was very nice of you to say.
Oh, of course, it's absolutely true. So I've talked enough. Should we get right into the questions? Okay, so Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about your life as a parent before your brain injury?
Okay, so I'll take you back to 2001, early 2001, and had decided to be a stay-at-home mom. I had two little girls. The youngest one had turned 3 in August of 2001, and the oldest was 5. And she was starting kindergarten, first time going into public school, and it was very exciting. We were also in the process of moving. My husband and I decided to build a bigger house, and we were moving within the same town, but across town. And that house got delayed. So there was a little bit of stress going on in our family. And then 9/11 happened. And I grew up in northern New Jersey and had a lot of family in New York. So it hit hard for me personally. Luckily, no one in my family was hurt, but to watch the devastation was awful. And my husband, Mike, worked in industry that was training, did a lot of training programs, and he traveled a lot. Well, his job was eliminated in early November of 2001. The same day that Olivia was diagnosed with strabismus, which is an eye condition where your eyes, instead of being cross-eyed, go out. I found that devastating, and it's almost comical now, because if that had been the worst thing, that would have been such an easy fix. I had the same thing at the same age. It's fixable. But to me, it was like, oh wow, she's gonna have to have surgery, you know, that was what's upsetting. And then 3 weeks later, I was driving to my older daughter was gonna be in the Nutcracker ballet. And she was so excited it was gonna be her first stage rehearsal. And the last thing I remember is pulling out of my driveway and my girls were singing along to a Blues Clues CD. And the next thing I remember is hearing Hannah yelling, "Mommy, mommy, wake up." And I realized at that moment that something was wrong with Olivia. I don't know why I knew, but I guess it was mother's intuition. I have no idea. And then
Mm-hmm.
I heard someone talking to me through the car. I have no visual memory. And he was asking, "Is there anyone else in your third row of your minivan?" And I said, "No." I later learned the reason he asked me that was because there was nothing left of the third row. It
Oh,
was
wow.
totally gone.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily no one was, but I remember yelling, "You have to save her, you have to save her." Next thing I knew, I woke up in the emergency room and Hannah was sitting in the corner and she looked at me and said, "Are we going to be late for my rehearsal?" And I knew enough that we weren't going to make it. I looked at the clock actually and I thought, there's no way we're going to make it, but had no idea what had happened.
Mm,
Then little flashes started. I never regained the memory, but like I kind of figured out what was going on. Then the nurse came running in, and so long story short, I had a pretty, what I would say, easy life. I was married, I had, a husband, and I was able to stay home with my kids. We were doing well, I thought, um, and then the world came crashing down.
mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing how everything just changes in that instant.
Yeah.
And also our kind of our reactions in the moment as well to what's going on. Like and kind of it's almost it doesn't fully set in sometimes that understanding of the
No,
gravity of what it is.
no, you're right. And that, a little child saying to me, "Are we going to be late for my rehearsal?" I mean, I laugh about it now, but at the time, I was but she didn't know. She wasn't told what the severity was. She had no idea.
Hmm.
Um, and it took many years for us to actually talk about what her memory was of that night and, what she remembered happening and seeing. Um, and I always worried about that,
Oh,
what she saw.
that's incredible. That's actually going to be one of the questions we have in a little bit. So what were kind of some of the immediate changes that you noticed after your brain injury, after this traumatic event happened?
Um, what was kind of hard to know what was my shock and what was other stuff. I mean, we were in the hospital with Olivia. So, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not doing anything really. Um, so I was tired, but it was the stress also, and what was going on and making the arrangements of who was going to stay with Hannah. And Mike and I were we were always wanted someone at the hospital with Olivia. So we were going back, we would switch off.
Hmm.
So I just attributed it all to the stress of what had happened.
Hmm.
I'd had some neck pain and was looked at the ER and they told me there was nothing wrong. I went to the ER at the hospital. She had to be moved to a trauma one center.
Oh, wow.
They looked at me about a couple days in there because I kept saying how my neck hurt. And they looked at me there and they said, "You might need physical therapy. You're sleeping on a cot. You were in this accident. It's probably nothing." Um, that's what they kept telling me. So I kept thinking, okay, it's nothing. It's going to go away.
Hmm.
It wasn't until we came home after her inpatient rehab that I started to realize something was wrong. Like my first clue was that I couldn't be woken up. If I was sleeping and my kids came in and they had a bad dream, they couldn't wake me. I was dead to the world.
Hmm.
And then I couldn't read. I could read, I just couldn't understand what I was reading. And that was the biggest concern for me because I thought I was an avid reader and I couldn't even read a newspaper article. I had to keep reading it over and over and still didn't understand what I was reading. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I thought, there's something's not right. And so I went to my primary care doctor and saw the nurse practitioner. And I didn't realize what she was diagnosing, but she said, I want you to see a neuropsychologist. And had I thought that through, I would have realized what she was trying to test for. Went and had neuropsych testing, the cognitive testing. And then when I went back for my results, he told me that I had a brain injury and I was devastated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I went home, I cried. I looked it up first. And because that was before smartphones and it was before everyone had a computer with the internet. So you had to like do your own little research. And I went home and cried. But
Mm-hmm.
then I realized that maybe it's a gift,
Mm-hmm.
that I could understand just a little bit of what Olivia was going through, and maybe we could help each other.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way of seeing it, especially because it seems like that experience of you not being properly diagnosed at the hospital, despite what would seem like such an obvious diagnosis, is so common. The same thing happened to me. They were more concerned with my broken leg, it seemed like, than what was going on with the fact that I was dizzy and, couldn't communicate well. And it seems like, you're very active with the advocacy work as well, that's something that we just come across time and time again, that critical early time period is just missed because for some reason in the hospitals they're just kind of pushing you through in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I was told, you're fine. It's just going to take time and you might have to have some physical therapy, but you're good.
Hmm.
And people are really shocked at that. Given that I was spending so much time in the hospital, that no one clued into the fact that there might be something going on.
Hmm. Yeah. And I sometimes wonder also if some of that can be like the mom strength that kind of kicks in, there's stories of the moms that lift up
Mm.
the cars that are on their children with superhuman strength, not something we could normally do, but we're in that mom mode of like, okay, yes, we have these physical things going on, but the focus is our children, what needs to be done there. And so I wonder if sometimes, those medical providers are looking at how seemingly well we're doing, but not realizing it's the only choice we really have given ourselves in that moment.
True.
Um,
And I pushed them a lot. I wanted her to get as much of the therapies as she could get, because I was told that, you have a window and you have to maximize this window. And I felt like if we could get her home, then she would heal better.
mhm.
And so, but they should have realized that maybe there was something going on with me, that why I was pushing and pushing and pushing.
Mm,
Um, but
yeah,
in hindsight, I don't know. Maybe now they would recognize it.
absolutely. Hopefully so. And you're so vocal about it too with your advocacy work. I know that it's making a difference with that going forward. And also I'd like to ask, do you find you're kind of in a unique situation of being a parent who has a brain injury, but also caring for a child that has a brain injury? Or do you feel that that's a unique situation? Is that something you come across more often, or do you feel like that's something that's more unique?
It's very unique. I looked for people who were parents who had a brain injury. I had asked at different, she gets case management through an organization. And I said, do you have any parents who have a brain injury and are also caring for a child? And they kept telling me no. And I did later on meet someone, and we had similar stories, totally different events. I mean, hers was a fireworks accident. And so it wasn't a car accident,
Hmm.
um, but I think in the rough early years, it would have really been helpful if I could have found someone who was going through the same thing.
Hmm.
And I didn't talk about my injury very much. It wasn't until um, it was for a long time. I participated with the Speakers Bureau where we would talk to organizations, but my family wasn't involved, my friends weren't involved. I talked there, but I didn't advertise it. I didn't really bring it up. And I realized as Olivia was getting older and after we told her about her own injury, she was about 10, I started to realize if I want her to be okay with hers, I have to talk about mine. And
Hmm.
so I slowly started to come to terms with it. I started being more open about it.
Hmm.
And I mean, I have friends who up until a couple years ago really either weren't listening or didn't realize I had a brain injury, and who were kind of like, oh,
Wow.
because I think I tried to hide,
Hmm. Yeah, that's
which,
understandable.
and that takes a lot of energy to try to hide it. And so I was probably not doing myself a service.
Mm, hmm. That could be hard, especially though I feel with the way that sometimes the outside world perceives those with disabilities, and especially with brain injury being an invisible disability and one that's not really well understood. I feel like at times that can kind of be forced upon us as well in some ways.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
So you kind of touched on what I'd like to ask you about next about how you addressed talking about your brain injury and brain injury in general with your children. So could you share a little bit with us about how you kind of broach that subject with your children?
So with my oldest daughter, it wasn't until I had a third daughter in 2008. So when probably during 2008, 2009, Hannah would say things like, "Oh, remember when I was little?" And she'd say something, and I probably had a blank look on my face because it would take me a couple minutes to like put my brain back in that time. And she's like, "How come you never remember anything?"
Mm,
And I, right then and there, I decided to tell her. And I said, it's not that I don't want to remember, it's just that I sometimes have a hard time getting those memories. And it's because remember the accident? And I told her.
hmm.
Um, and she was pretty mature at that time. So I wasn't worried that she'd be upset, and she handled it well.
Hmm.
Olivia knew because I had won an award for like a volunteer of the year. And in the program, it said that I was a brain injury survivor. And I remember sitting in the auditorium, and she turned to me and she goes, "Oh, you had a brain injury too?" And it was like almost like this bonding moment. And I go, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh," and like, and in retrospect, that was probably one of the first times she met someone else who had a brain injury
Mm,
that could who had had a brain injury. I think for her, and I like regretted later that maybe I should have told her a lot earlier. But and then with my youngest daughter, she was like 4 or 5. She'd heard me talking on the phone, like looking for doctors and things. And I remember her saying, because I guess I was looking for a doctor, and I said, well, my daughter had a brain injury. And when I got off the phone, she said, "Am I the daughter you were talking about?" And I said, "No, no, no, that's Olivia." And she's like, "Okay." And then later she heard Olivia give a speech and talked about it, and that's how she knew about mine. And with her, I think because it's always been in her life, her entire life has been Olivia was here, I was here, we were all, the
mhm,
accident happened before she was born. So I think I find that she's very accepting of people who have a disability or
mm,
people who are suffering from whatever.
mhm,
I have always found that she's just much more open and caring and doesn't really question why does someone act different, or why does someone look different, or why does someone walk differently. She just accepts them.
mhm,
And maybe that was, kind of the blessing in that.
mhm,
Not that my other kids weren't. I don't mean to say that, but just
mhm,
with her, just seemed like she was just didn't get bothered by people being different.
mhm. Wow, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful to hear. Creating more empathetic citizens all over the world. I love
Yeah, I think we feel a lot more of them.
that. Absolutely. So can you share a little bit about what kind of support you received from your spouse or your family or friends during your recovery time or even going forward?
Well, I didn't my husband knew, obviously. I remember I used to do our finances and pay all our bills and such. And at one point I said to him, I can't do it anymore. I could not. Doing that was just too overwhelming, too taxing. I couldn't see straight. I could see, but I just couldn't do it. And
Mm,
so I had him take all that over, which was hard. It's always been hard for me to ask for help. And so that was really hard, but that was something I knew. I was afraid that I was going to make a huge mistake. And so I
Mhm.
gave that over to him and said, "Can you just handle this for me?" And I also had to learn how to not to multitask. I was the queen of multitasking. I'd be on the phone, I'd have my kids playing, I'd be making dinner, and I just couldn't do it. I could be on the phone and that's just it, or be with my kids or make dinner, but each thing had to be done separately. And
Mhm.
that was really hard for me to accept and to acknowledge. That was one of the hardest. And then the fatigue um, was really, really bad. And I finally went to a sleep specialist and was diagnosed with narcolepsy and sleep apnea, which they feel was brought on by the accident because I didn't have symptoms of that at all beforehand. So once I got that under control, it got a little bit better.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like there are so many kind of comorbidities and other things that come up with having the brain injury that people just don't know about. So like going to a sleep specialist, like that's not something I would have thought of, but I have issues with that as well. So that's really helpful information, I think, for people to know that who have brain injuries. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Oh yeah, and I didn't know about it either. It was because someone else had told me and said, a lot of people with brain injury have sleep issues, and I was like, oh, that makes sense when you think about it.
yeah, it's all about that community. I love that. Sharing the information that we find out with each other. So I'm also really interested to know because you had two children prior to your injury, and then you had another one after. And so, in my mind, I just have the one, and I'm just thinking with my brain injury and everything else, there's no way I would consider having another child. So I would really love to know what kind of made you feel like you would be prepared and able to handle having another child after having a brain injury.
I probably didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. I'd always wanted a third, and so I'd had a miscarriage right before our accident. So I always felt that void, like that I wanted that third. And I remember driving home when we were coming back from inpatient rehab, and I remember sitting in the car with my husband, and Olivia was in her car seat, and she'd fallen asleep very quickly. And I said to him, I don't think we can have another baby because we don't know what's going to happen with her. And we both agreed. We'd both been thinking about it apparently, but we needed to have the conversation because we're not going to have any more. But then we got to a point where she seemed to be stable. You know, she still had difficulties with school, but she was, things weren't as dicey as they had been. And I've, said, I think maybe we should try to have another child. Um, and so lo and behold, I was pregnant. The pregnancy was hard in the beginning. The fatigue was so bad, so much worse
Mm,
than with my first. My first was I had a lot of fatigue, but there was nothing like this. That this fatigue was so hard. Um, and then I think I just had to learn. I had to take breaks or rest time when she's. I would try to get her. First of all, she wasn't a good napper, so she'd usually be napping on me, or I would be holding her, so I would have to just relax and try to get in rest whenever I could. Um, and but I also think because there was a little bit of an age difference, there was she's 10 years younger than Olivia, 12 years younger than Hannah. And so as an older mom, I think I learned to not be so uptight about if she's potty trained, if she's, walking, if she's
mm,
not saying these words. Like I was a little bit more relaxed or chill than some of the moms who had first babies at her age. Like I
mhm.
was kind of like, they learn to potty train eventually. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't end up sleeping in your bed till they're 20.
Mhm.
Um, like those kind of things didn't bother me. So maybe that helped. I mean, I don't know.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And do you feel like there was anything you did any differently as you prepared for your third daughter during pregnancy as opposed to the first two with the brain injury, or was it pretty much the same, you'd say?
It was pretty much the same. It was just the fatigue, and it lasted throughout the pregnancy. I just had to learn how to navigate it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But because they were in school all day, I had a little bit more time where I could figure that out on my own.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I bet that age difference did
Yeah.
provide a little bit of assistance with that. I mean, it's slightly easier. Not that it was
And
easy.
that, yeah, and that too. I mean, they could hold, like when they came home from school, if I was trying to make dinner, they could hold her. They could, they loved to hold her. She was like a little doll. So,
No.
um, or play with her, so that was also a huge help.
Okay, that's good to know too. Um, so what are some ways that you have adapted your parenting techniques to kind of suit your current capabilities? And I'd love to know, especially as your daughters are older now, so kind of how that changed as they grew as well.
How I adapted it.
Mhm.
I
Compare their.
think well, I'll talk about Olivia a little bit. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. With Olivia, I think I was very much involved in her school. I was very, she had an individualized education plan. I had to constantly be in there checking to make sure she's getting the things she needed. So it was a lot. And then I had to learn to kind of not not totally back off, but to back off a little bit and let her try to figure out what part she could advocate for herself, and teaching her those how she could advocate. And in the beginning, it was like, I don't want to talk to my teacher. And I said, okay, well, can you write her a note? Can
Mhm,
you, this is before they did email in school, but can you
mhm,
write her a note and say, Mrs. Brown, you know, I need this or something. And so she's like, okay, I'll try to do that. So trying to give her the tools to how to speak up for herself and how to advocate and how to, and also to tell people, it's not, she's beautiful hair. It's this long curly hair. People, she so would wear it in a ponytail. And I was always like, Libby, why do we wear your hair in a ponytail all the time? It's so beautiful. She's like, because when I have it down, people touch it. And I was like, okay, I get it that, I wouldn't want people touching me either.
mhm,
So, but giving her those tools and letting her speak up for herself, and trying to get her to talk about her feelings, that was hard because she bottled it all in.
mhm,
And so, and trying to give her that autonomy to make some decisions on her own, and, you know, to feel it out a little bit and see how it felt and whether those were good decisions or not.
mhm,
And then that was okay. And if we would regroup and figure out something else. Um, I think, again, I tried to be a little bit more laid back with the things like my youngest is going to be a junior in high school. And so in my brain, I'm like, I'm not going to get all wrapped up in the whole, which kid is the smartest and which kid is going to what school and stuff. Um, and I really haven't I don't agree with a lot of that stuff. So I pull back and I don't engage in those conversations because I don't think it's even worth it.
mhm,
These are my children. That's their accomplishments and not mine.
mhm,
I've tried to, model good behaviors and good things, but they're their own people and they're gonna, make their own mistakes, but they're also gonna have their own successes, and their successes are their successes, not mine. Like
mhm,
I had really nothing to do with it other than to give them. Um, so I've tried to do that.
mhm. That's excellent. That's really, I think that's wonderful advice even for parents that don't have brain injuries to look at it in that way. That's really good. Let's see, what else would we like to go over? Oh, a really important one that I know comes up a lot. How do you manage the emotional demands of parenting with a brain injury? And if you have anything specific you'd like to share about mental health, please feel free to do that also.
So I've always was emotional, but I noticed as I was getting, I became even more emotional, like cry at the drop of a hat. Things would just affect me very differently. And it for years I didn't understand why. And then someone had said to me, oh, someone else who has a brain injury, actually one of our um, members of the council, we were talking and she said that she has also has can be very quick to get upset, to tear up, to withdraw. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's what I do. And then I also knew that a bit about Olivia because she's very quick to go to tears. And, you know, kids would make fun of her. And, or, she would have to, she learned the skill of, walking away if that she was getting too upset, but she would be so quick to tears. And then I finally was like, wow, that's part of the brain injury. I had no, like, I hadn't made that connection. I was like thinking it was like a fault of my own, and learning that I had to. The thing about the mental health is, I think it's important for a lot of people who have experienced a brain injury, a family member who's had, a brain injury. You have to go through a grief process
Mhm.
because you haven't lost a person, but you've lost the person that as you knew them. And it's a grief, no
Mhm.
matter how you look at it. And I think, and it took me many years to finally bite the bullet and to do it. And I was so grateful when I did because the therapist helped me process all that. That yes, my daughter is still here, but it's different. It's not different bad. It's not different good. It's just different. And there's other things that come along with it. And I see your mom like nodding her head, which I love.
Mhm.
Um, but there's so much wrapped around that, and people don't realize the grief with brain injury. I had someone approach me less than a year later after our accident who said, I'm so glad everything worked out. And she was sincere, and she really felt like we fell down, scraped our knees and just got up, and I also didn't even know how to respond to that. I kind of was dumbfounded. I was like, oh, well, thanks. And I walked away because it was so heavy. Like, oh my God, how could she say that? But yet she has no idea. It could have been a teaching moment. I don't know. I look back and think like, but we were in the middle of we were at a kid's birthday party. I wasn't going to have this conversation, but I realized there's a grief. I remember when, when Olivia was in high school and they starting to look at college, and that wasn't going to be like a going away to college, was not in her future. But it was really hard for me to watch all these other people go through it. So I actually went off social media for a while because I didn't want to have it. I couldn't have it thrown in my face all the time. It was too hard.
Mhm.
So I think the mental health is huge. I think there's always things that come up. Um, and there's anger. There's a lot of anger. Because something has, whether we had someone hit the car, so it was the other driver's fault, or whether it's your own fault, you fall down a flight of stairs or whatever, but there's still anger that this happened to you and that you have to live with the ramifications of that. That's a human to be angry, to be sad, but you have to learn how to process those feelings and what to do with them.
That's
That's what I've found has been important.
That's excellent. You just hit everything on the head. I feel like all the experiences that we go through and the way you're dealing with. I also really love that you pointed out taking that break from social media because I think that can be difficult to kind of constantly see those things thrown in your face, the weddings, the celebrations, all of those things. It's difficult to see that. So it's very respectable to, see someone that was like, okay, I'm gonna take that break for myself and not engage with that for however long you need to. I love
And I
that.
try to, in this age of social media, that it has a good a place in our society. But I always tell my kids, you have to remember that not everything you see on social media is 100%. Like these wonderful, happy families are not wonderful, happy families 100% of the time.
Mm,
That they have, things go on in other houses too that we don't know about. And you, the grass always looks greener, but it's not always greener.
mm,
Every family has something that has, happened. And we just have to, accept that that's part of life.
Hmm.
It's not always going to be, roses and chocolate. There's going to be thorns. There's going to be things that are going to happen that you might not like, but you have to figure out how to get yourself back and keep, keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. So this one I really would love to hear your thoughts on because you are such an excellent advocate for yourself and for your family. So how do you advocate for yourself and your family's needs within the healthcare system? I know it's kind of a big
I
question.
found
If you have any pointers or highlights?
I think in the beginning it was hard. Like I didn't know where I could speak up, but as I've gone forward and actually like as I've known that Olivia has noticed things, like I will advocate in front of her. I will say to doctors, she has a processing disorder. You have to slow it down. Can you, speak more? Can you repeat that? Can you write something down? Things like that. I have um just last year we were in a dermatologist's office and it was really busy and they asked her to fill out a new patient. No, it wasn't a new patient, but update the forms for the year. And she wanted to do it herself. And I was like, fine. And it takes her longer.
Mm,
And meanwhile, there's all these people coming through and so I just want you to know she has an invisible disability and she doesn't process information as quickly. And I need you to realize that you have a lot of people coming through here and there's a lot of elderly and I'm sure there's other people with invisible disabilities and they don't move as quickly and you need to be a little bit more cognizant of that. And the one woman seemed a little bothered by me, but the other woman was very accommodating. She says, you know what, you're 100% right, we do have a lot of patients like that and we should be more patient. And so I felt like, okay, that was a good, she had no idea I had done that. And if she knew, she would be embarrassed. And so I made sure to do it not in front of her on purpose. But things like that, I feel, and even meeting with a neurologist on a virtual meeting, and he was very short with her and very difficult. And I thought, he's a neurologist. He should know better than anybody.
yeah.
And when we got off, she asked me, she said, was he being rude? And I said, absolutely. And I said, and we will not be going back to him because that is not acceptable.
Hmm.
Um, and I think knowing, and I say this to parents, whether you've had it or not, go with your gut. If you think something is wrong, or you think there's something, especially for your child, go with your gut because your gut is usually right. And the times I didn't go with my gut, I regretted it. There were times where I really felt there was something going on with her, or there was something brain injury related. And when I would go and they'd figure something out and they say, oh yeah, you were right. And I was like, okay, good. I went with my gut. It's like I felt like something wasn't right. Something wasn't going right.
Hmm. That's excellent. I also love that you pointed out in that moment at the office that the things that your daughter's experiencing, people with other types of conditions experience too. Like it's not just unique to people that have brain injuries. It affects all kinds of different people with different kind of issues, conditions. And so although it should be enough that it affects brain injury, that should be enough for them to care. But knowing that it affects so many different kinds of people that don't have brain injuries as well, I love that you pointed that out to them as well to really get them to comprehend the depth of um, the reasons as to why they should be changing that behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think people think they see her and they think, oh, she's just, your average 20 something young woman and she's capable and she is capable. It just takes her a little bit longer. Um, and to be getting that upset about a form,
Yes,
um,
there's that extra few minutes
in
where
the
they
scheme of
throw
things.
things off that terribly.
Yeah. So, but then and I also started to realize, I wonder how many other doctors' offices this happens.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more observant about that. And I watch and see what they do. But and then I've been in doctors' offices with her where I am just amazed at how calm and how thorough they can be and spend as much time as they possibly can, not like cutting the appointment short because she has extra questions, and just giving that complete, attention and talking to her and not to me, you know, is huge. And I walk out thinking, why can't every doctor do that? But those are the ones I'm going to recommend to others. Those are the doctors I'm going to go back to because it's that personal service, it's that respect.
Hmm. That makes a difference. And thank you for sharing that also, because I do think, even for myself, sometimes I really get focused on all of those negative experiences that I have with those in the medical community. So knowing that there are good doctors out there, good offices out there, that's really encouraging to know and to hear that as well. And I think it's also going to be really encouraging for those who are watching this as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to just shop around. You have to, and which is time consuming and pain. It's the same thing with therapists. I found it's really hard to find the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
And with Olivia, I really shopped around. We went to a bunch of different ones until we found the right fit. And I did it for myself too. And I tell people, if you're looking for someone, interview them because you're not, and if it doesn't feel right, then don't go back. I mean, it's your choice. You're not, obligated to go back to them.
That's excellent advice also, because I think that's another thing that we can kind of get caught up in is, oh, they're the medical professional. We just have to go with that. But learning to advocate for yourself in that way as well, knowing like, okay, this isn't a good fit. Even if they are a good professional, they're not a good fit for me personally. So being able to say, okay, not this one. Love that. And I'd love for you to share what are some of the most rewarding moments that you've experienced as a parent post-injury?
Um, well, one of the most rewarding was Olivia was asked to be speaker at the Brain Injury Awareness Day on Capitol Hill in 2017. She was the first pediatric patient to be on the panel. They usually have a panel of speakers, and at that time, and she was the first pediatric one, and she got up there and she spoke. She went over time, which was fine. They allowed that, but that was a highlight to be in that room, to feel that energy, to she received a standing ovation, which was, I mean, both my husband and I were, I was crying, I don't know about him, but I'm sure he was teary too. But just to see that, that took so much work to get her to that point, of writing the speech and practicing the speech and then going to the event, which was tons of people, and she does not like to be around, you know, large groups of people, and the halls echo and the sounds and the sensory were really hard for her. And saving all that energy to give the speech. And after the speech, it was like she, you know, she didn't fall apart, but she was exhausted. I mean, we had to leave right away because we had to get her in the car to go home. But that was huge. Watching her walk across the stage at high school graduation was huge. I turned to my husband and said, "You and I should be walking that stage with her," because I felt like if we had not supported her through her education, I don't know if she would have done it. Um, those were, and then she participates in a music therapy group, and they do performances, and watching those where she tells portions of her story in a way where she tries to support and, you know, give inspiration to others is just so heartwarming to see how far she's come. I love to watch my children succeed in what they love. My oldest daughter is a journalist, and reading her things, and she's just sent me a podcast episode she was on today, and just listening and going, wow, I sent it back. I'm like, you're very eloquent. You speak so nicely. Um, you're very intelligent. That just gives me, joy to see that she's doing what she loves to do, what she's always wanted to do. That was always her dream, was to be a writer, and she's done it. Um, and then watching my youngest figure out where her, where her passions are, and watching her, experience all that is huge. I mean, I just love that, to see, when their minds are going and you can see where things are getting lit up in there, that wow, this is what I like to do, or this is what I think I might want to do. So those are my moments. And watching them, I didn't have a sister, so they have sisters, and I feel that I hope that that bond will continue for the rest of their lives. That's what I really hope for.
I love that. That's so encouraging. That's so encouraging to hear all those wonderful, rewarding moments because I feel like, especially as a parent with brain injuries, and you're going through all those day-to-day struggles and seeing how difficult it is and the way that it's affecting your children. So to hear all of these beautiful and accomplished moments that your daughters have been able to experience is really, that's amazing.
Thank you. And they did it all on their own.
I don't know about that. Just knowing you and just
Uh,
hearing, even here, you had quite a bit of a hand in that. So what advice would you give to other parents who have brain injuries who might be considering having more children post injury?
I would tell them that they should. If they really want to have more children, they should. Um, I would also tell them that they have to take care of themselves. Because, like they say, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to take care of your children. So give yourself time to rest. To You don't have to have the cleanest house. You don't have to have a home cooked meal on the table every day, but you need to take care of yourself so you're capable of giving that energy back to your family. Um, I would tell them to piece out time for themselves, whether it be meditation or yoga or whatever. I found yoga to be very helpful for me personally. Um, I really, it helped me to learn how to breathe, which sounds funny, but it really did. And I use those breathing techniques all the time. Like when I feel under stress, I I can tell that I'm using those breathing techniques to calm myself down. Or um, I read. I'm like an avid reader too. That's like the time that I carve out for myself to read. And I think, there's no such thing as perfection. And there's no such, there's no perfect parent, but you can do the best that you can. And that's okay. Because that's all we're all doing, is we're trying to do the best we can. And we do make mistakes, and that's okay. Um, you can either, you can apologize for your mistakes, you can pick yourself up and do better the next day. But and I think you're teaching your children too how to overcome adversity. I mean, Jay, you're the perfect example of that, teaching Nate how, you've overcome what happened to you, your injury. And yes, you're living with the deficits every day, and he probably knows it better than anyone, but you're also showing him how you can make a life out of that and bring the joy back.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
But it was called The Birth of Joy. And it was when my youngest daughter, Anya, was born, and the story was my husband was in the kitchen and he was holding her and I was making dinner and the other girls were upstairs doing homework or whatever. And he was holding her and he was looking at her and he goes, wow, this is the first time I've experienced joy since the accident. And that really hit me because I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And I immediately went to, why didn't I know that? Like, how did I not figure that out? But he never voiced it. But holding this brand new baby made him realize that there could be joy again.
Hmm.
And so, and that too, that you have to, bad things happen, but we can still have joy in our lives moving forward.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. I don't have anything else to say after that because that was just incredible.
I didn't.
Thank you. So, for our last question before we go into the Q&A, is there any other parting advice or encouragement that you'd like to give to other parents who are living with brain injury?
I would say that don't be shy about talking about your own brain injury. You know, I regret that I didn't do it sooner, and I'm not really sure what the holdup was. It's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed by. It's a fact of life. I mean, something. I mean, they're much more common than we think they are. I think a lot more people have them than we know, and it's okay. And just continue moving forward, and have those little pieces of happiness and joy or laughter especially.
Excellent. That's wonderful. That's a perfect way to end that portion of our interview. Kelly, thank you so much for taking your time to come and speak to us this afternoon,
Thank you.
this evening. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.